Welcome to the debate. Right now, somewhere in the Philippines, there is a freelance graphic designer who is single-handedly producing the daily creative output of an entire mid-sized New York marketing agency.
Wow. Just one person?
Just one person, using nothing more than a standard laptop and, a $20 a month AI subscription. But at this exact same moment, the world's largest financial institutions are quietly preparing algorithms to absorb an estimated 300 million full-time jobs globally. So today, we are exploring really the defining economic tension of our time.
Yeah, the ultimate double-edged sword of the 21st century, really.
Exactly. We are looking at the reality of artificial intelligence. I mean, it's no longer just a prediction. It's actively adding trillions to global GDP. It's optimizing transoceanic supply chains and fundamentally revolutionizing how work gets done.
Right, from Wall Street down to rural clinics in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, and that brings us to the core question we really need to untangle today. As AI drastically increases productivity, do these benefits reach all workers equally, or does this massive technological leap disproportionately favor specific groups while leaving the rest entirely behind?
It's the big question.
It is. And when I look at the landscape, I see AI serving as a great equalizer. I believe it is democratizing expertise, lowering the barriers to entry for everyday workers and small businesses worldwide, and frankly, leveling the global playing field.
And see, I look at that exact same economic windfall and I see a profoundly different structural reality. I argue that AI's productivity gains are deeply and inherently uneven. This shift heavily favors capital over routine labor, and it threatens everyday workers with massive displacement while risking a severe generational atrophy of fundamental human skills.
Well, let's get right into the mechanics of why I believe democratization is the dominant force here. Because AI is fundamentally breaking down traditional skill barriers.
Okay, how so?
Well, it takes cognitive capabilities that used to require like a PhD or a massive enterprise analytics budget, and it puts them directly into the hands of everyday workers. We are seeing a complete collapse of the technical divide.
I mean, sure, it's more accessible, but...
Take the digital workplace, right? Historically, data analytics was the exclusive domain of highly trained specialists. If you wanted to know why sales dipped in a specific region, you submitted a ticket and waited, 2 weeks for a data scientist to build a model?
If you were lucky, yeah.
Right. But today, because of natural language processing, a regional manager at a company like Unilever can just type a question in plain English into a platform like Tableau.
But they aren't just doing a keyword search. I mean, the system is actually building the model in real time.
Exactly. That's the magic of it. They are using tools built on AutoML, automated machine learning. Imagine you're trying to predict demand for a product. In the old days, you needed a statistician to build a highly complex mathematical tree to weigh all the variables.
Right.
AutoML is like having an invisible team of thousands of statisticians working in milliseconds. They instantly plant what's called a random forest, which is literally a mathematical council of thousands of different decision trees, all looking at the data and voting on the most likely outcome.
It's impressive tech. I won't deny that.
The worker just typed, how many units will we sell next quarter? And behind the scenes, they get a 20% more accurate forecast instantly. It's an unprecedented elevation of global human potential. We are giving anyone, anywhere, access to enterprise-level cognition.
Well, I come at it from a different way. The economic windfall is absolutely undeniable. We are looking at projections showing AI adding $15.7 trillion to global GDP by the end of the decade.
Which is massive.
It is a staggering amount of wealth creation. But we have to look at the structural reality of how that wealth is generated, and more importantly, who captures it. The shift inherently favors capital over routine labor. You mentioned the individual worker feeling empowered, but look at the macroeconomic reality.
Okay, let's look at it.
Goldman Sachs projects that automation will handle 300 million full-time equivalents in the next few years. That is 300 million jobs worth of human labor shifted from payrolls to algorithms.
But see, that assumes those workers just disappear, rather than shifting to higher value tasks.
The problem is the mechanism of the technology itself. Think about how these neural networks actually learn. They use a process called backpropagation.
Right, adjusting the weights.
Exactly. When an AI makes a mistake, The mathematical error is sent backward through the network, automatically adjusting millions of internal dials so it never makes that exact mistake again. So it doesn't just assist the worker, it learns from the worker, adapts, and eventually executes the task autonomously.
But it still needs human oversight.
For now. But while productivity scales magnificently for the corporation, the human cost is highly concentrated. If you're performing routine digital or physical tasks, you are training your replacement. Productivity is soaring, yes, but it is not pulling all workers up with it. It's hollowing out the middle.
Look, if you are listening to this and you are in middle management or you are an entry-level knowledge worker, you've probably felt that exact anxiety. You're being told AI makes you faster, but you're secretly wondering if it's actually just shadowing you.
Right. It's a very real fear.
It is. But when you look at how these tools are actually deployed on the ground, AI acts as an intellectual amplifier, not an executioner. Let's look at software engineering. Developers are using tools like GitHub Copilot, which relies on something called retrieval augmented generation.
Right, so it's not just guessing the code from scratch.
Correct. Instead of the AI trying to guess the next line of code from its general memory, retrieval augmented generation turns the process into an open book test. The AI actively reaches into the company's specific secured database, reads the relevant architectural rules, and writes the code based on that exact context.
Which is a huge time saver.
It's accelerating developer tasks by 55%. Down in Brazil, engineers at Nubank are using this to iterate financial applications 30% faster. Think of AI as like a highly advanced navigational GPS for complex logic.
Okay.
A GPS doesn't replace the driver. It just frees the driver from having to memorize every street on the map, allowing them to focus entirely on the destination and how to navigate complex, unpredictable traffic patterns. AI handles the boilerplate, which frees the human mind for higher-level strategy.
That's a highly compelling argument, but let's follow that GPS analogy to its logical conclusion. What happens when the driver forgets how to navigate entirely?
Well,
What happens when you are so reliant on the screen that you lose your internal compass? This brings us to a profound psychological and practical risk, which is skill atrophy. You argue that AI handles the boilerplate, but the boilerplate is the training ground.
you mean it's how junior workers cut their teeth?
Exactly. Historically, you learn your trade by doing the rote work. You write the terrible first drafts. You manually resize the layouts. You hunt down the missing semicolon in 1,000 lines of code.
Sure, the grunt work.
But that cognitive friction is where expertise is forged. It builds the neural pathways in the human brain that allow you to spot larger patterns later in your career. Consider the creative industries.
Okay.
If AI models are drafting 70% of initial ad copy for consumer brands like Procter & Gamble, or if junior designers are using Figma plugins powered by diffusion models,
Which are incredible, by the way.
they are, where the AI literally starts with a screen of visual static and iteratively removes the noise, sculpting the pixels until a photorealistic layout emerges. But if the AI does that, how does the next generation learn the foundational artisanal craft of their trade?
Look, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. We aren't de-skilling the workforce. We're elevating the baseline of what workers can achieve. The nature of the training ground is simply evolving.
Evolving into what, though? Prompting?
Exactly. Yes, the boilerplate work is being automated, but that necessitates hybrid training models and the creation of entirely new disciplines. We are seeing a massive surge in demand for AI prompt engineers, workflow orchestrators, and AI ethicists.
But those are entirely different skill sets.
Right, but a junior worker today isn't learning how to manually denoise an image. They are learning how to direct a highly complex algorithmic system to do it efficiently. That actually requires a higher level of critical thinking, editorial judgment, and cross-disciplinary knowledge. We are shifting from a workforce of manual creators to a workforce of strategic editors and curators. The skill isn't atrophying. It's migrating up the value chain.
But migrating up the value chain assumes that everyone has the capital, the infrastructure, and the access to make that jump. You're arguing that AI gives a junior designer a superpower.
It absolutely does.
I'll grant you that. But if every junior designer on Earth now has that superpower, the competitive advantage shifts away from the individual worker and back to whoever owns the underlying infrastructure. which completely changes the competitive balance between businesses. You claim this democratizes the economy, but the infrastructure required to run these models is heavily concentrating corporate power.
See, I argue it levels the playing field precisely because the software as a service model makes these tools incredibly accessible. You don't need to own the infrastructure to reap the benefits. AI gives small players the arsenal of corporate giants.
In what meaningful way?
Think about a small e-commerce startup in Nigeria. 5 years ago, they couldn't possibly compete with a massive global retailer's customer service apparatus. Today, they can deploy natural language processing chatbots built on transformer architectures.
Meaning the AI understands the context of a whole sentence, not just isolated keywords.
Right. It reads the whole paragraph at once to understand the customer's intent. Because of that, a 5-person startup can provide 24/7, highly accurate, multilingual customer support.
Okay, sure.
Or take a local cafe in Sao Paulo. By using a widely available AI marketing tool like Jasper, for instance, to generate highly optimized, localized promotional content, they can rival the digital presence of massive multinational coffee chains. They don't need a $1 million marketing department anymore. They just need an internet connection and a $30 monthly subscription. That fundamentally levels the global economic playing field.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The examples you're giving, a chatbot handling returns, a cafe writing an Instagram caption faster, those are surface-level applications.
They're highly impactful for small businesses.
Yes, it saves the barista 10 minutes. But the most profound, economy-reshaping productivity gains are compounding at the very top, and they require massive, centralized capital. Look at logistics and manufacturing. Amazon isn't just using chat algorithms. They are utilizing reinforcement learning, specifically Q-learning algorithms.
Which operates basically like a video game scoring system.
Exactly. It's a trial and error system. Imagine a simulated robot that gets a point every time it takes the most efficient route and loses a point for bumping into a wall or taking too long.
Right.
Amazon's warehouse systems run through millions of these simulated trial and error loops, processing vast amounts of sensor data to navigate physical robots and fulfill orders 25% faster. Foxconn is outfitting its mega factories with computer vision AI and robotic arms, cutting manufacturing defects by 50%. HSBC is using robotic process automation to process $1 trillion in trade finance annually, 60% faster.
But those are just larger scale applications of the exact same underlying logic.
But the scale is the entire point. The underlying infrastructure to achieve that scale is staggering. We are talking about hyperscaler data centers the size of small towns. We are talking about proprietary data sets that took decades to build.
Sure, the compute power is intense.
The massive compute power required to train physics-informed neural networks is exclusively in the hands of the biggest players. There's a $13 trillion business automation boom happening right now. The lion's share of that wealth is being captured by entrenched monopolies who can afford to optimize every microsecond of their global supply chain. A small cafe in Sao Paulo using an AI tool for social media is not competing with a hyperscaler's reinforcement learning logistics network. The power is concentrating. It is not dispersing.
Well, you're comparing apples and global supply chains there.
Am I?
Yes. The cafe isn't trying to build a global logistics network. They're trying to capture local market share, and AI empowers them to do exactly that. The deployment of these tools is trickling down remarkably well. You mentioned design earlier. Look at Canva's Magic Studio.
Okay.
It automates resizing, styling, and asset generation, and its usage has absolutely exploded among small and medium enterprises in places like Indonesia. These SMEs are prototyping in minutes. They are iterating via AI feedback loops that score the usability of their designs using simulated heat maps.
Right. But
They are utilizing cognitive scaling that was previously impossible for a small business. The tech giants might own the data centers, but they are renting out the cognitive power for pennies on the dollar that undeniably democratizes access for the little guy.
Let's talk about that cognitive power then. Because if we are asking whether the benefits reach all workers equally, we have to look closely at the foundational integrity of these AI models themselves. Can the benefits truly be equal if the underlying intelligence is inherently flawed?
Ah, you're pointing toward the training data?
I'm pointing towards systemic bias baked directly into the mathematical foundation. AI models are trained on historical data. By definition, historical data contains historical prejudices. We've seen this clearly in the real world.
Like with the early vision models?
Yes, facial recognition systems notoriously required massive fixes because they were failing to accurately identify darker skin tones. Now take that foundational flaw and apply it to the automation of human resources, which is a massive sector right now. Companies are using AI matching algorithms to screen millions of job applicants a year. Unilever screens what, 1.8 million?
Right.
These systems use something called vector embeddings and cosine similarity.
Which sounds incredibly complex, but it's essentially just plotting traits on a graph.
Right. Think of it as a massive, multi-dimensional map. Every trait on a resume, your education, the keywords you use, your years of experience, is plotted as a physical coordinate on this map. Cosine similarity is just a mathematical way of measuring the distance between 2 points. If the company's historical ideal executive sits in one specific corner of that map, and your resume plots closely to it, you get the interview.
And that cuts time to hire by 50%.
It is highly efficient. But what if the historical data that created that ideal executive cluster is made up almost entirely of men who went to specific Ivy League schools and use specific cultural vernacular?
Then the AI mimics that.
Exactly. That bias isn't just a human preference anymore. It is mathematically embedded into the vector space. The AI will systematically filter out minority workers, women, or non-traditional candidates because they literally sit too far away on the map. It scales historical discrimination at an industrial level.
I hear you.
It doesn't matter how fast the hiring process is if the algorithmic gatekeeper disproportionately harms specific demographic groups. You cannot claim AI is an equalizing force for all workers when the very machinery of it is capable of automating systemic exclusion.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Have you considered that AI is actively being utilized right now to solve the exact human biases you were talking about? I don't deny that historical bias is a real and pressing challenge. However, humans are terribly biased hiring managers.
We are, absolutely.
We get tired, we favor people who remind us of ourselves, we have unconscious prejudices that are nearly impossible to track. AI, on the other hand, can be audited. We can look at the math and correct it.
Audited by whom, though? And at what cost?
By the developers through rigorous human-in-the-loop safeguards and adversarial training. Adversarial training is fascinating. It's essentially pitting two AIs against each other.
Right, the generator and the discriminator.
Yeah, think of a counterfeiter and a detective. One AI generates the hiring recommendations, and the other AI is specifically trained to hunt down and flag any statistical bias in those recommendations. They fight each other until the bias is scrubbed. Look at what's happening right now with IBM's pilot programs in the Asia-Pacific region.
Okay.
They are specifically deploying AI debiasing tools to ensure fair hiring practices and foster inclusive growth. Furthermore, we're seeing the rise of ethical AI frameworks, like the OECD principles, providing global guardrails. We're taking the murky subconscious biases of human HR departments and forcing them into the light of transparent, auditable algorithms. When properly calibrated, AI doesn't scale discrimination. It becomes an instrument for unprecedented fairness in the workplace.
But when properly calibrated is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting in that sentence.
It takes work, yes.
It requires constant, expensive vigilance. As long as models are trained on internet-scale data via self-supervised learning, their default state is to ingest the toxic realities of that data. The fact that we need emergency adversarial networks to scrub bias or dedicated debiasing tools for HR really proves my point. Without massive intervention from highly paid engineers, the system naturally replicates the inequalities of the past. It does not automatically level the playing field for the future.
Well, I argue the intervention is happening, and it's working beyond just corporate HR. Look at how this is deployed in historically underserved areas. We are seeing AI tutors lifting test scores by 25% in under-resourced schools in India and Bangladesh.
Which is fantastic.
We are seeing predictive models forecasting crop health in Kenya, utilizing machine learning to analyze weather patterns, which is increasing smallholder farmer incomes by 30%. This isn't just about corporate efficiency, it's about giving marginalized populations access to education, credit, and agronomic insights that were previously locked behind walls of privilege and geography.
Look, the applications in agriculture and education are brilliant. Using machine learning to stabilize food prices is a triumph, but we have to return to the core economic reality for the everyday worker. If an AI tutor helps a student in Bangladesh excel in math, but by the time they graduate, the entry-level data analysis jobs have been entirely automated by cloud-based machine learning models, what is the actual economic outcome for that student?
The outcome is that they leverage those exact same cloud-based tools to start their own enterprise. Or they step into the new cognitive roles that are emerging faster than the rote jobs are being lost. AI is a tool. It is not a pre-written destiny. It collapses the technical barriers from software development in Bangalore to agriculture in Kenya. It is making the global workforce smarter, faster, and more inclusive. When I look at the totality of the evidence, I firmly believe AI stands as the great democratizer of our era.
And when I look at the evidence, the looming displacement of 300 million jobs, the threat of deep skill atrophy as we outsource our cognitive training grounds, and the heavy concentration of a multi-trillion-dollar windfall among a handful of tech monopolies, I see a different reality. The technological achievements are staggering, but raw efficiency does not automatically equal equity. Unchecked, this productivity boom threatens to widen the gaps in the global workforce, enriching the architects of the systems while displacing the human hands that built the economy in the first place.
Well, it is clear we are looking at an unstoppable force, but I think there is a vital point of convergence here. Both of us agree that this technology is fundamentally reshaping the core nature of work.
Absolutely.
And whether you view it as a great equalizer or an engine of disparity, we can agree that ethical deployment, diverse training data, and robust regulatory frameworks like the EU AI Act are absolutely essential to managing its impact.
Completely agreed. The guardrails are not optional. They are the only thing that will determine whether this massive transition is a human triumph or a structural crisis.
And that really reflects the immense value of viewing this technological revolution through multiple lenses. We have to celebrate the incredible democratization of capabilities, the fact that anyone with a smartphone can now access the sum of human knowledge parsed by an intelligence that never sleeps.
It is incredible.
But we must remain fiercely vigilant about the economic disparities and structural biases it may accelerate. There is so much nuance here. And ultimately, it is up to you, the listener, to form your own conclusion on whether AI will ultimately narrow or widen the gaps in the global workforce. We've built the fastest cognitive engine in human history. The only question left is who gets to hold the keys.